So to start with, I just want to introduce myself and who I am. So my name is Linda Forrest, and I work as a writer, a speaker, a muse, and a mentor. And over the last 30 years, I've done research on how the brain works, how the body responds, and how we as a species can get the most out of both. And so what I'm doing in this course, this is an advanced course from the Inspired Evolution Project. But even if you're ready to jump into more of the advanced work like I do here, I do recommend completing the free Relief of Suffering and Become More Centered courses. The Relief of Suffering is a brain chemistry course, so it has a lot of the language from what I teach in this course. Also, Become More Centered is a meditation course. I won't be digging into those, so you definitely don't need them to take this course. But if at any point you're feeling like you're not really kind of in the same synchronous movement with me in the course, those are a big benefit, and they are both free. So with that said, I also will recommend the Science Behind Miraculous Healing with this course, but that won't be released until later in the summer. But all of those kind of work together to create a complete picture of how human relationships work and the underlying factors of those relationships. So that said, what we're going to do in this course is we're going to talk about evolving primal survival mechanisms to no longer be just caught in primal fight or flight and rest and digest, but to be able to move to more advanced, purely human mechanisms, because these survival mechanisms are the underlying factor of why we react or get triggered and why relationships affect us. So I'll include more information on that topic as we continue. But for today, what we're going to focus on for this first session is getting to know what's being offered in the program, but also getting a chance to get to know more about you. So one of the things, like I said, we're going to do in the homework is really check in with ourselves and where we are in relationships right now. Also, what our worldview is on relationships and how we think our relationships are working at the moment. Also, where we'd like to go with them. As you go, as the questions become available, what's going to happen is they are going to relate to what I'm going to talk about tonight. So they're going to relate to each of the individual topics that we'll be going over the next 12 weeks or 12 sessions. So they'll set a foundation for the work and what we'll cover over the next few months. This course, like I mentioned, is designed to be a 3-month course, but you can take it at the pace that's comfortable for you. So what we'll cover as we go through the next 12 courses is, the first thing we're going to cover is the evolution of consciousness. Now, I'm not here to talk about the conversation between creation or evolution. This is actually about how the psychology of the human species has changed over the last several thousand years. So this is really about the expansion of consciousness and the fact that the human brain is changing. There, with over 7.5 billion people on the planet, our survival mechanisms, being steeped in safety and familiarity, will no longer work. So in this section of the course, we'll be talking about the changes that are happening, what this population size, the effect it's having on those old survival mechanisms. And we'll talk about accelerating the process of evolution. So we are moving into a more advanced survival mechanisms, but this course gives you a lot of tips on how to advance that, how to make that happen faster. So you're not subject to those fight or flight, rest and digest moments. You're actually in a place where you can move beyond that and into these more advanced, centered kind of Zen guru states that we tend to see. And you can get there quickly instead of having it take decades or even lifetimes for some. It's about being able to achieve those states in a relatively short amount of time. So in addition to that, we are going to delve into the 7-year developmental cycles. In this section of the course, we're breaking down Maslow's introduction of human development. So it's not development based off of just age, it's based off of a general reference to the transition we tend to make at these 7, 14, 21, 28, and so on markers. So this introduction to development that Maslow offered, though, is now flawed in the new system. So we're going to talk about development, both as it stands now as a primal species and what it will look like when we mature into the more advanced human species. So this is where we're talking about abandoning that safety and familiarity and moving more into safety and adaptability. And I'm going to talk about how that affects those cycles, and also how no one is their chronological age. So you may meet people that are still mentally teenagers, even though they're physically much older than that. And so I'm going to break down those and talk about how those affect relationships, specifically, how those affect all of our relationships. In the third set of sessions, we're going to talk about the idea of quantum balancing. So what we're going to do is we're going to delve into physics a bit for this third session, using the quantum web as an analogy. So we're going to shed the traditional ideas of multiple dimensions and connect with different dimensions in a more relatable conversation. So the fact that each person has a perspective and is unique is going to lead us into a conversation that is very much about confirmation bias. So it's going to be based more in neuroscience and psychology and what creates this concept of a multidimensional universe. So unlike previously in this program, we won't be discussing masculine and feminine or passive and aggressive. So we're not going to talk about polarity as opposites. What's really occurred with the Z generation and the new consciousness that's available to us is that there are no longer two definitive sides to humanity. We all have these unique perspectives. And so this session is really about learning the simple tools to help us exist in the most peaceful way. So we're going to talk about people we love to be around, people I call our parallels, and we're going to talk about people who trigger us, the people that we just wish didn't exist. And we're going to talk about how to have both relationships serve in expanding our consciousness so that no matter who we're around, we're still in that evolving state. And we're going to talk about how that helps us break out of safety and familiarity, because we no longer have to worry about people that would trigger us. We are able to live in the most peace possible amidst varying viewpoints. The next section we're going to get into is what I call roles and rules. This is really digging deeper into confirmation bias. And so this will be section 4 of the program, and we're going to talk about the relationship between the conscious and the subconscious mind. So we have a total of 86 billion neurons in our brain. 83 billion of those neurons are unconscious, and only 3 billion are conscious. And yet so many processes try to teach us how to use our conscious mind to control our subconscious mind, when our subconscious mind is the most adept and the most dominant presence in our mind. So we're going to talk about changing that and how to take advantage of the existing system, that our subconscious mind's ability to think at high reasoning levels, how do we let our conscious mind take advantage of that? And instead of fighting what already is. We're going to learn how to use this already efficient wheel of our brain. So our brain, human brain, is an astounding thing, and what it's capable of is astounding. But when we start trying to use those 3 billion neurons to control the other 83 billion, our journey gets arduous and painful. When we can learn to build the dynamic relationship between the two, that's when magic happens, when we can live in that state of genius all the time. So we're going to dig into that as we talk about roles and rules, because we want to talk about the confirmation bias that creates roles, what they call matrixing, why some people might remind us of other people, and how when they do, our brain immediately assigns all these rules to them. And so this is really about using the part of brain that helps us perceive everyone as an individual. And so it helps us shed boxes and limitations. The fifth section of the program is about dominant creation. Now, this is human relation to the environment, but what we're looking at here is the fact that how we relate to the environment has changed. It used to be the environment that caused us to evolve. So weather conditions or the amount of food that was available all caused humans to do things like create houses and climate control and create a will and eventually a car. But now humans are having more impact on the environment than the environment is having on humans. But if you're a person that's an empath, or if you're a person that feels subject to the conditions in your life, or if you externalize your value, if your value is in how you look or your status or the amount of money you have, all of these things make us vulnerable and trigger those fight or flight responses that keep us in that primal brain. So if we ever find ourselves thinking about pushing against the world or putting up walls of protection, we're going to have the opportunity to break free of those social survival mechanisms. This section is really about coming strong internally. So a lot of people tend to think of energy like there's an energy body and a human body. And the truth is, the human body creates the energy body. So the human body is a bunch of molecules colliding. And as those molecules collide, they generate heat. And which is why we are 98.6 degrees generally. So it's our body that creates that heat. And then that heat radiates out, creating an energy signature, which you might call our energetic space or our aura, or there's a lot of different terms people have used. But this is a very real thing that our body is pushing out by the amount of energy it has. Well, if we tend to collapse that energetic body, this is where we experience that empath experience, where we then become subject to the conditions in the room or to other people, and particularly to relationships. So this is a really powerful section of the program for people that have ever had relationships where the other people in their life tell them who to be, whether it's their family or a significant other or their boss. That if they find people tend to be bullying or controlling, and they tend to be subject to that, this is a great opportunity to break completely free of that and no longer be subject to those external energies, but to own the room, bring who you are to the room rather than having the room affect you. So this is where life no longer happens to us. We happen to it. And then in the final section of the course, which will be the last section, this is section 6. This is going to be about putting a plan in action for making an impact on the world. Now, the real thing that happened, like I said, generations aren't age-based. And the real thing that happened in the millennial movement is we had this major shift where it was no longer self-survival. We're no longer just worried about taking care of ourselves. Humans, the most powerful drug to the human brain is giving to others, particularly giving money or food. Because when we give sustenance, we feel empowered, and we feel valuable to the species. And so this is about being able to step into that role of being valuable, but not having it just be based on what we do. So it's not about going out necessarily and feeding the homeless or fighting for human rights. While those can be part of it, it's more about recognizing that we are so much more than our history. We are each have this unique perspective. Each one of us as individuals has never existed before. Even if we believe in something like reincarnation, we still haven't existed as the person we are today, ever in history. And we'll never exist again, and that's valuable. Nature doesn't do anything by accident. And so it's about realizing that my uniqueness is what makes me valuable. The reason I'm valuable is because I exist, not because I am here to do a specific thing, but I am here to be a specific person. And we're going to tie this into how that connects with evolution, how we're evolving the consciousness of our parents and the consciousness of our history, and how all of this ties together, but that it's not efforted. It doesn't demand of us. It is a natural, organic byproduct of who we are. And so as we move into this, we're going to find clear intention. We're going to be beyond the confirmation biases that might have stood in our way before. We're going to get a clear understanding of how the brain works and how we can now bring forth the full potential of who we are, and how we can do it organically, how it doesn't have to be efforted. And in the end, that brings us to the goal of relationship mastery, which is feeling safe, balanced, and clear in any condition with any person. And I mean this to an extreme. I mean, if I was held hostage, I'd be able to be safe, balanced, and clear. Even if I was around a person that historically really triggered me, I'd be able to feel safe, balanced, and clear. So that this becomes the baseline of our life, that we can live from this space all the time and expand from there, and so that none of those external limitations affect us anymore. So that's what we're going to cover in today's session. I do want to say the exercises are already online and ready on the website. Like, they're just a handful of questions to kind of set a baseline. So when you go on, beneath the video lesson, you'll find your questions for contemplation, is what they're called. So you're going to have the video lesson, and right below that, it'll say questions for contemplation. I've organized the course for approximately one contemplation per day. But again, I just do it that works the best way for you. Kind of move at your own pace. There are some lessons that you might move through quickly, and others that you might want to spend a few weeks on. So the program will be there for as long as you want it. It is never going to disappear. As long as my site exists, it will exist. So you can take your time. Now, there is a place where you can enter answers beneath. So you'll get the question for contemplation, and then underneath there will be a place to answer questions. You can use a journal if you want. If you don't want to post your answers on a website, you don't need to post your answers there. If you want to, you can. If you do, well, either way, whether you decide to use a journal or use the online fields to answer your questions, either way, you do need to press the submit answers. It'll say finish questions for contemplation. You need to make sure you hit that button for it to mark that you've progressed through the course. Also, if you answer one or two questions online and you decide to finish later, hit submit on those questions, because the fields will empty after you leave and come back. Your information won't stay in the field. And the reason why is because I want to give you a chance to go back and do this as many times as you want. You can go through the course as many times as you want. So I don't have the field holding on to the information. It would require you to not be able to retake quizzes and stuff if that were the case. So whether you use their fields or not, remember to hit finish quiz, And if you do use the fields, but not all of them, remember to submit it anyway. You can go back and do the other questions after. And if you have any questions on that, you can let me know. If you ever want to go back and review the answers you've submitted, the way you do that is you go to your page, your landing page. So you'll go to the website, inspiredevolution.com, education, my courses. It's the very first selection. The minute you hit my courses, it'll show you all the courses that you're signed up for. There's a little blue arrow just to the right of that. If you hit that little blue arrow, all your essays will be underneath that. So all of the questions you've answered will show up underneath. In the next session, what we're going to cover is the evolution of consciousness. So this is where we begin our journey. And then this session is the first of two sessions where we'll delve into the discussion of consciousness and how it's evolving. So at first, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about evolution at a species level. And in this session, we'll be looking at consciousness as a whole. In the next session after this, we will be discussing evolution of the individual, but we really want to lay some groundwork on how is our species evolving consciously? What's different about how the brain works now versus how it worked 2,000 years ago? And then we can dig into this concept of the body of life. So this is how are we moving as a species? Because before we're anything, before we're our gender or our nationality or our opinions, we're human. And so we're kind of subject to the human brain and how it works. And we're also subject to the brain that was passed down to us. So when we're born, we have the DNA of our parents. We have the neurons of our parents. And we spend the first 9 years of our life shedding neurons to decide which ones are important for survival. It isn't until after that we start creating new ideas and new concepts. Everything before that is driven about how our brain wants to evolve to be more than our parents were. This is healthy human. To want more is one of the healthiest aspects of us. So this class is full of technical detail. Now, I do want to mention that if you're a person that doesn't want to get into the technical detail and evolution and the brain and how it works and all of the scientific side of data, I do have another course called Lit Up. It's a subscription. And in Lit Up, it's more about aligning with nature, and it's kind of more what I call the soul of the work. So it's a lot more emotionally based and more in line with nature and how nature moves. So I have this relationship balancing side, which is really about the technical details of how the brain works, how the species works, how consciousness works. Lit Up is more about consciousness in line with nature, and it's more, it's softer and kind of more nurturing a process, I think. It's more gentle, a gentle approach. And so that comes in a subscription. But like I said before, you can transfer over if you prefer. We'll also next week break down the body of life into the individual states of consciousness. So what I mean by the body of life is human consciousness as a whole. So basically, the over 7.5 billion people that exist today and everything that came before. So every person that has ever existed exists within that consciousness. And so I'm going to break down kind of how that consciousness is working and where we are, where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going next. I'm also going to talk about the driving force of evolution. What's causing the evolutionary changes? And then we're going to talk about what our role is in today's world. So kind of how we utilize that and where we want to put our focus. So that's it for this class for what's going to be on the video. Like I said, there are the questions for contemplation. So you can go ahead and continue with those now. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next session.